Recovery is sanctification in disguise. Recovery is simply the reality of recognizing that unless God is in charge of my life, unless I am surrendered to the will of God, I am bound to fail.
And welcome to Miracles from the Hill podcast, where we share raw stories that display the anatomy of God's grace here at Miracle Hill Ministries. If this is your first time joining us, please subscribe. And of course, you can like, comment, and leave a review. To connect with us, visit our website linked in the description box. And now, here's our host, Ryan Dirk.
Greetings, listeners, and welcome to Season 4 of the Miracles from the Hill podcast. This season, we're diving into the reality of addiction and its solutions. If you'd like more people to hear this podcast, please pause the episode like I just did, verbally, and leave a review on whatever platform you're listening to. You can also follow the show to make sure you're the very first person to hear new content when it comes out. And we'd love for you to email us at podcast@miraclehill.org so you can ask questions or suggest episodes or content that you want to hear. On this episode, we're excited to have the Honorable Reverend Ken Kelly joining us. Hello, Ken.
Hey, good to be here.
We're glad to have you here. So before I kind of unpack what we're talking about, Ken was the executive director of Greenwood Pathway House for 5 years before he retired. The reason I know him is for 14 years before that, he was the vice president of adult ministries at Miracle Hill. And then prior to that, a bunch of other service opportunities, including 10 years at Atlanta Union Mission and in Jacksonville, which all that means is Ken's been doing this for a really, really long time and knows a lot about recovery and helped frame Overcomers and Renewal, which are Miracle Hill's current addiction recovery program. So we're excited to have you here. We are doing this season on recovery, and we're framing it using this kind of Christian adaptation of the 12 steps, which we use in framing each episode on a specific step and the kind of corresponding tasks that go with it. And we are starting out setting a high bar with Ken talking about step 1. But we are blessed that we get to talk a lot about Jesus on this podcast. So we're going to start there. Ken, when did you meet Jesus?
Well, thank you, Ryan. I met Jesus at a young age of 11 at a vacation Bible school. I grew up in a dysfunctional family, but I had a 5th grade school teacher who invited me to a vacation Bible school, and I went there, and it was during that experience of that vacation Bible school that I actually made the decision to invite Jesus into my heart and life and recognize that I was indeed a sinner. But at any rate, going from there, it was a pretty rocky road. As I said, living in a dysfunctional family, when I told my folks that I had made a profession of faith, they said, "That's great," and that was about it. Yeah. And so from there, it was a struggle through my teen years and some things that might come up in our discussion today, but that eventually brought me to the place where I came to at the age of 26 to really turn my life and move over to Jesus Christ and go into full-time ministry. Yeah.
Well, before we get to the full-time ministry, let's go back to the garbage. So talk about your own recovery story.
Okay. So as an ACOA, adult child of an alcoholic, the struggle is that I was adamantly opposed to alcoholism, but because of the dysfunction in the family and my role was the oldest male child, heavily steeped into codependence in a way that really created a lot of dysfunction in my own life and a lot of inability to adjust to life as it came at me from different directions. So I wound up, did go into drinking at the age of 16, started drinking, was working in a skating rink as a floor manager 5 nights a week, among other jobs. But got into drinking, and then, of course, was accepted to Georgia Tech miraculously. Went to Georgia Tech and started drinking more, and ran out of money, dropped out of Georgia Tech, and got a notice to report for physical. These were Vietnam days. And so at that point, I joined the Air Force and continued my drinking history through about 15 months of active duty in the Air Force, becoming an inertial navigation computer technician, and then getting a hardship discharge because my family disintegrated in my absence. So I was sent back home, which really didn't help me at all. It was helpful for the family because I was able to take care of my younger brothers, get my mom into a facility, a mental health facility. My dad was in Grady Hospital, and I was sort of towing the ropes for everybody. So getting through that just, really messed with my mind. And so I got into computer technician work, became a computer technician for Olivetti, and was traveling the whole eastern seaboard repairing computers. And in these days it was Autotronic. It was mostly accounting computers that were out, that were steel punch cards and old stuff. And so working in that field, I still had my alcohol issues. So it was in 1973 that a good friend of mine who was partner in 3 other convenience stores asked me if I wanted to become a partner. And so in 1973, I resigned from my position at Olivetti as top technician for the company at that point, but I resigned and bought a convenience store.
Okay.
Geographical fix to a problem, changing playgrounds, changing everything, did not work.
Well, now you sold booze too. Like, that's not helpful.
No, and we didn't. We didn't sell alcohol.
There was
in
no
our
alcohol
store.
in the store.
Yeah,
Okay.
and back then it was we had made that decision. It was a lot harder back then to sell alcohol in the 70s. But so it was at that point that I sort of bottomed out in my journey and came to the end of myself. I joined a local church there, which kind of boomeranged on me because as I got into the local church, here I am. I'm trying to get into a significant life change, and the pastor of the church comes and says, "Now that you're a member of church," he says, I want to open an account here at your store and charge my gas and stuff here at the store," which, it kind of went south. And then from there, it went south further because they found that there was some misappropriation of funds and wound up dismissing him and then asking me, because I was a business owner in the community, to be on the pulpit committee to bring in a new pastor. So it was through that experience of actually going out and listening to pastors, and listening to what they were saying, that I got in touch with, I had an experience at the age of 16 where I was confident that God was calling me to go into full-time ministry. But I, quickly declined the invitation on the basis of I wouldn't make much money, and I needed to make a lot of money to be able to have the kind of life I wanted. So what happened at that point was I turned that corner of realizing that there was going to have to be an ultimate surrender, and I've told the story many times of arguing all night long with the steering wheel of my Ford pickup truck, which was God, and explaining to him why I could not do what it was that he wanted me to do, and constantly hearing, well, that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
And so in that process, it was kind of coming to the place, as I've told the story, at 6 a.m. on that morning in March of 1976, I officially resigned as being in control of my life and turned my life and will over to Jesus Christ completely, and made the decision that whatever it was He wanted me to do, I would do it, regardless of whether I felt like I could do it or not, regardless of whether or not it went the way I wanted it to go or not. And I think that was a turning point that started me in a direction that, again, took a long time to develop. And we'll go into that into the story of my ministries. Yeah.
So at that point, is that when you stopped drinking?
Yes.
Okay, so you have this you wrestled with God. He busted your hip in the front seat of your Ford truck. Yeah. And you put down the booze and you picked up the mantle not knowing what it was going to be.
Right. At that point, I had determined that I was to be a full-time pastor.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because most people, when they think, there's like one bucket.
Right.
I'm going to church ministry.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So, and then at that point, you did go into church ministry.
I did. Yeah. I went. Well, at that point, I decided. I went to my home pastor. Said, Harry, I had been a part of the committee that called this pastor, and he was, he was 4 years my senior. He was 30 and I was 26, and he had a good bit more wisdom than I had because he had not had this kind of journey I had had. So I told him that God had called me to preach and that I wanted to do that, and his response was, well, he said, that's great, but there's a lot of things you need to do before you try to start preaching. You've got a lot of things to take care of. And so it wound up being 3.5 years of undergraduate work in humanistic psychology at West Georgia, and then 4 more years of seminary at Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas, where I got my degree, my MDiv. And at that point, I had done a little bit of preaching while I was in seminary.
Sure.
But at that point, I started on the journey of really going into full-time pastorate.
So was Harry your Sherpa through that whole journey, or did he just kind of set you off?
No, he was with me all the way through seminary, and the church supported me through that journey in seminary. And then when I came out, he actually helped me locate the first church that I pastored coming out of seminary.
Okay.
So,
and when do you meet Cindy in this story?
Well, Cindy doesn't come into the story. At this point, I was married to another woman.
Okay.
So that was a marriage that I got into. It was one of those things that we got together right as I was starting on my journey. She was a young Christian, and we had dated a lot in the past, and so we had been at one point engaged, and that got broken off. And so, but we got married, and that marriage lasted for about 15 years. So Cindy doesn't come into the picture until much later in the journey, but the process was that as you go through recovery, and you're well aware of this, there are steps in that process that you sometimes don't get until later down the road.
For sure.
And so one of the things that I had really struggled with was relationships, and building healthy relationships was very difficult for me. And so, again, my relationships were more codependent in nature and more, I was going to say to some degree, but to a large degree, self-serving. Yeah. It was about, I have this mission, I have this plan, I have this goal. Your job is to help me get there, and you can imagine how well that works.
Yeah, and we talk about this, I feel like, frequently on here, but I think a lot of people come into a life change scenario or recovery scenario, and they think that they're going to do something for this short period of time and they're going to be fixed, but we're never fixed.
No.
And it often takes a long time to walk through a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So how did the Lord move you from from the pulpit to rescue mission work or addiction recovery work?
Well, it was through that ministry divorce, that came at a time, I was in the ministry, excuse me, and pastoring a church, and so there was a parting of the ways of me and my ex-wife that sort of manifested itself in a way that, she was going back to University of Georgia, and I was wanting to consider, I was being asked to move to another church in another area that would have been a bigger church, a more lucrative church, and she wanted to stay where we were so that she could go to school, and through that debacle, we actually wound up deciding that we had to split. So I resigned my church first and told them that, and we went through a difficult ministry divorce. And at that time, I had a very good friend by the name of Jack Lindsay, who was the director of the Potter's House in Northeast Georgia. Yeah. And I had been teaching in the seminary extension, teaching classes, and Jack was teaching classes, and I was teaching different classes, introduction to New Testament, introduction to Old Testament, those kind of things. And so, when I resigned my church, he said, I want you to come over to the Potter's House and work for me there. And I was already talking to companies in Atlanta about computer work. Yeah, I was on my way out of ministry.
Trying to run away.
Yeah, I was pretty much done with that. There was a night in the parking lot of a beer joint that I argued with God all night long about why I should go get drunk. But by His grace, I didn't. But anyway, so I reluctantly, after a lot of pressure from Jack, I said, I'm going to tell you the truth. I said, I've struggled with alcoholism myself. I wouldn't give you a nickel for 10 alcoholics. I wouldn't trust one any further. I could throw him. I don't really think I'm cut out to work with alcoholics. And so, here's the deal. I'll help you for 1 year, just to help you out. But that's it. And, that first year I went into some personal counseling, as well as dealing with some workbook work with ACOA, Adult Children of Alcoholics, and started working through all of that. And it was through that, and it was in that first year that I said, the Potter's House is a wonderful place, but we're doing a lousy job of helping alcoholics get clean and sober. We're just not doing a very good job. And so God just laid it on my heart. I began a quest of how do we really help people in addiction change their lives. How do you help people get on a journey that will help them reach the destination that they want to get to? Because we had a beautiful facility. We had 500-acre farm. We had 14 vocational shops. I had 200 head of cattle. We had swine operation. We had all kinds of heavy equipment. We did all kinds of things there. But we had sort of, the mentality was we were rehabbing people into how to do jobs. But rehabbing people in how to do jobs wasn't really helping them with their recovery. We were sending them to 2 AA meetings a week, and in about 2 months we pronounced them clean and sent them on their way. But the problem was, as I told folks, we were helping 268 people a year. The only problem was it was the same 268 people every year. And so we were a mill that was just grinding aimlessly at no progress at all. So
on a beautiful farm, but no progress.
Yeah. But doing a lot of things, making money for the ministry, but not really accomplishing the goals.
So you pointed to kind of the journey in your life And certainly I have a journey in my own life. And so the kind of the point of the episode is the beginning of the journey, right? So I'm going to go a little out of order on the questions.
Sure.
There's this term that we throw around in recovery circles that I am not a fan of anymore. And the term is hitting bottom, right? Like that's the beginning of the journey moment. Do you think that's a real thing, the idea of hitting bottom?
Well, I think everybody, I think the beginning of recovery is coming to terms with you're not who you think you are. It's coming to terms with the reality that, you've created this false self that you have sold to the world, hook, line, and sinker. And all,
and even to yourself, like you may believe it yourself.
Yeah, you have to sell it to yourself first.
Yeah,
but then, the bottom is, everybody has a bottom. Everybody has a starting point from which they work up. But I think the main key here, Ryan, is that you have to get on you have to get on a different journey. And I guess my favorite analogy for that is that Richard Rohr, I think, said it best, but he said we spend most of our time in this ego trip that we get on as young people and young adults, is we're trying to think our way into a new way of living, when in reality you have to live your way into a new way of thinking, and that's the struggle that we get into, that brings us into this whole concept of where do you start? You start at the point where you come to the realization that I'm as phony as a $3 bill. I'm trying to be who I'm telling everybody I am, but it's not working. I'm not who I'm telling everybody I am, and I can't tell everybody who I really am. So what do you do with that? And what happens in that is that you get to the place of the tension becomes so great, you either have to, you let go one way or the other. And of course, I think that happens a few times.
Yeah.
You go back and forth.
Sure.
Until you realize, that, denial is really, and I know we're going to talk about that in a minute, but denial is really the struggle that you get into, and the reality about that is, because of this struggle of life that I think every human being goes through, whether others don't struggle near as desperately as I did or in the way that you did. Some people grow up in good Christian homes, have great upbringing, but they still come to the place where they have to become their own selves, and they have to become the person that God's created them to be.
And reconcile that.
Reconcile that.
Yeah, so I think that people think of, especially in recovery circles, they think of hitting bottom as this moment in time when things are so bad that you have this moment of clarity that flips on. The problem is what you just said, that people go back and forth. Mm-hmm. And so, the only true bottom is death.
Yeah.
Right? How many times personally, and have I seen in thousands of people, that they hit bottom, then they relapse and they find a deeper bottom, right? Like there's always a deeper bottom. And so, I love the way that you're describing it. It's, I think what they're after is this idea of this turning point. Right. Where you're confronted with your reality in a way that maybe you've avoided for a really long time. So let's talk a little bit. Well, let me quote the step to frame it. So the step says, and there's many versions of it, but the version we're going to use says, we admitted we were powerless over our human condition and our lives had become unmanageable. So that's that turning point, that admittance. And the thing that fights against it is that idea of denial, right? So talk a little bit more about denial. How does that manifest itself in people's lives?
Yeah. I think, when we talk about denial, it's certainly a whole lot more than a river in Egypt.
Sure.
But a lot of people have said that. But I think that I would go be as bold as to say that it's the default posture of the human race. Denial is that inability to admit, that my life is unmanageable, and no matter what I do, I will not control it. And I think it goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. It goes back to that initial fall, where Adam and Eve are in the garden, and my interpretation of the fall, and you've heard it before, I'm sure, because you've heard me talk a lot about this, was that Adam and Eve, they decided that they were going to be in control of their own life, and they said, God, we really like you. You're great. We thank you for all you're doing, but we've decided that we're going to be in control of our own lives, and they ate the fruit and got the knowledge of good and evil, and found out it wasn't what they thought it was. They thought it was something that was going to be good, but as we always find out, when we try to be in control of our lives, it doesn't turn out good. It doesn't take us where we want to go. So just a quick summary, the first thing, they discovered they weren't in control of the environment, because now without rain, you can't grow crops, and they don't know how to do all of these things. Secondly, they discovered they couldn't be in control of other people, because one of their sons kills the other one, and because there's the crux of it. And then thirdly, they discovered they couldn't be in control of themselves, And denial, unfortunately, as I said, it's the default position of the human race. And the real struggle in spirituality today is that we are struggling more and more, especially in this country, with the reality that we are not in control. And that we will not accept that reality, that we are not in control. And so consequently, what happens is we're continuously fighting this losing battle to be in control of our lives. And the denial is that we can't acknowledge that recovery, and I'm going to be very bold here, and I'm going to make a huge jump because I've taught this for 35 years. Recovery is sanctification in disguise. Recovery is simply the reality of recognizing that unless God is in charge of my life, unless I am surrendered to the will of God, I am bound to fail. It is not negotiable. I will not succeed unless, like David, I can come to the place that I say, I'm overwhelmed by my own sin. I'm the problem. What can you do? Lord, do something with me that will transform me, because I cannot transform myself. And so it's a journey that starts with coming to terms with the fact that I cannot accomplish what I want to accomplish. I can only accomplish what God gives me to accomplish, and I'm willing to let Him accomplish through me.
So I quoted the step, and I quoted a very specific version of the step.
Right.
So, people find sobriety in AA all the time. But what I don't like about their version of the step is it says we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. Essentially, it puts the ownership on this inanimate object, right? Like alcohol's not the issue. Alcohol can't do anything, right? It's just, it's liquid in a bottle.
Yeah.
It's us that are the problem, right? Like it's our human condition and our, as you're pointing out, our perception of control over the world. And that idea of denial, or the opposition of denial, is a process that 35 years later, you've been teaching this, and you're still going through that process, and I'm still going through that process.
Exactly.
And we still think that we have control over certain things, which is just, it's hogwash, right?
Sure.
But in the case of somebody who's struggling with chemical addiction, they are experiencing these life-altering consequences,
right,
because of the thing with which they are trying to control or express control,
right,
versus the average I'm generalizing here, the average Christian who's been sitting in a pew for 60 years and think that they're holy and are still in denial of the things that they're trying to control in their own life. In some regards, I would say that the person stuck in alcoholism or addiction may be better off, because they're getting more consequences and seeing their need for Jesus in the midst of it, versus the person that's been sitting in a pew for 50 years and doesn't see it. Right.
And that's exactly the reason that I didn't go back to the church. I had several opportunities through the years to go back into full-time pastorate work, but the harvest is much greater when you're working with people who have come to a realization that their lives are completely out of control. It's very difficult to try to talk to people who are absolutely sure they have everything under control, and that everything is going exactly the way God would want it to go for their lives, and they're doing exactly what God would want them to do, when in fact, they've got lots of issues that they're in denial about. I'll just say it that way, and they don't want you to address those issues.
Yeah, and many of those issues are issues in God's economy, but are completely socially acceptable,
right?
From our earthly perspective, right? So they're not doing anything wrong if the world doesn't say they're doing anything.
So a lot of times pastors like myself get the message from the church: we want you to marry us, bury us, and leave us alone.
So, we're talking about this process, which certainly is true in my own life, true in your life. How does someone get to the end of themselves from a recovery perspective? Like, how do they work through that to get past that denial, especially in early recovery?
Well, I think, and going back to what you were just saying about AA, and sobriety, you have to start with something. And, again, like you said, most people that we deal with got there through alcohol or drugs, chemical substances. And so if you start with that, that's the starting point that you can start from, because if you really work through that with due diligence, it will take you into the reality of this is not, this is not something that's a 6-month program or a year-long program. This is a life journey which will go through the rest of my life, and so, what you're trying to do is help them come to terms with the fact that what you're dealing with here is a spiritual process, and that's the thing that I've when Atlanta, Jacksonville, Macon, Greenville, Greenwood, everywhere I've gone, I've tried to get people to understand one thing, that this journey of recovery is a spiritual process. And that's step one is the essential step of recovery, because I've seen thousands of people work an 11-step program 100 times, but if you do not get to the place that you are powerless, then, and that happens very often. People get into a program, and I won't call names, but I know lots of people who have gone through a program, and during the course of the program, they came in powerless. And in phase 1, they were powerless. And in phase 2, they started getting some power back. And in phase 3, and by the time they got to step 12, they were full of power again, Yeah. And I've got this, And some of them would get there in 4 steps. In 4 steps. Excuse me. So the problem is, is getting people to understand it by living into it. Because if you don't live into it, So many people want to get it in their head. You don't get recovery in your head. You only get recovery in your heart. You know, recovery is a heart process. You know, it's not a head process. And so the transformation of the heart is much more difficult than the transformation of the head. Mm-hmm. The only thing that can really transform the head is the heart. You know, and so you know it really is about getting people to understand. You know, I'm on a lifetime journey. I'm not, you know, this is not something that I will do in a year or two, and then I'll be okay.
I can't tell you how many times that I've told graduates of our programs, you can take that graduation certificate and rip it in half, right? It doesn't mean anything, right? It just means that you move from one stage to the next, but recovery is lifetime. So when people show up at the front doors of the Potter's House or Overcomers or wherever, fill in the blank, AA meeting, I'd love it if most of those people had the most pure motives when they showed up, but most of them don't, right? Mm-hmm. Most of them, there's some external pressure on them, whether it's the courts or their baby mama, or, you know, fill in the blank, that is expressing to them that they have to do something. Mm-hmm. And maybe they acknowledge it at some level in their head, and they know that they have a drug problem or a drinking problem or whatever the problem is. But they've got to work through this denial issue in kind of the early stages of a programmatic approach. How do you set up a program? How does a program help somebody work through this?
That's a great question. The reality is that you have to bring them, you know, and I've always been very upfront about this, you know, that you know, the guy comes to me and he says, you know, I said, why are you here? He said, well, my wife said if I don't go through this program, she's going to divorce me. Mm-hmm. And my response is usually, well, she's probably going to divorce you anyway, you know, because going through this program, it's going to change you. And he said, what do you mean it ain't going to change me? I said, well, it's not going to change you because you're not here to be changed. You're here to make your wife happy, you know. And, you know, if you're here to make your wife happy, you're not going to change. You're just going to try to make her believe that you've changed so that you can go back home. And that's not going to work. So if you don't, with all your heart, want to be here, if you don't want to be here, there's no point in doing the program, because the program, just like you mentioned a while ago, the program doesn't change people. People can only be changed if there's a willingness to invite, you know, God into their life to change them, you know. And now I know that AA, and I do want to say, you know, in the big book, I can't quote it exactly. I wrote it down and then I didn't bring it with me today, but there's a quote in the big book that says, you know, recovery is not overcoming an addiction. It's a daily walk in which we make it as long as our spiritual growth is in process. Mm-hmm. And so that's a paraphrase, but it basically what it says is, recovery is not about the substance or the issue. Recovery is about the spiritual transformation of my life, of becoming the person that God created me to be. And so when we bring people into the program, the very best thing we do, and this has always been one of my biggest challenges, is to find, train, and keep powerless counselors. You know, because the biggest problem in programs is when counselors become power. You know, when counselors become power, then you're saying one thing with your mouth and you're teaching with your actions. And the actions say, you're powerless because I've got power. And you'll do what I say because I'm in charge now. Which, you know, when those kind of things happen in programs, what happens is, you know, you're losing the concept, because the concept is always about, you know, I'm as powerless as you are, Ryan. You know, I don't have anything other than, God, just like you. And so the situation, is that what we have to do in programs is we have to strive constantly. And this is one of the things that, I wish, there were better ways to teach it, but there has to be a constant striving to be what we teach, because people don't care what you say. Yeah, they just want to see who you are, and so that was the whole in the beginning AA. I mean, and if you haven't read, you probably have, but anybody listening, if you haven't read Samuel Shoemaker's Apologia, I Stand by the Door, you need to read it, because Samuel Shoemaker was the great force behind Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson, that got them to understand that recovery is a spiritual process, and so the concept of standing by the door that he talks about, and I've used it several times, and it's sort of one of the things that I build my life around, is that he says, I stand by the door because there's so many people who want to find the door, but they don't know where the door is, And so this process of recovery is really about, D.T. Niles said it about evangelism, but I'll just take it into recovery. It's just one blind beggar telling another blind beggar where to find bread. Yeah. It's not about, something that you can or put in a bottle or sell or market. And I've seen, 1,000 marketed drug and alcohol recovery programs, all the way from Hazleton down through hundreds of others. But none of that impacts people's lives. The only thing that impacts people's lives is genuine sincerity and concern, that comes forth from that process of being there yourself, and being there in such a way that, he's struggling here, I'm struggling here, but we're all struggling.
Yeah.
And so, to really build successful life transformation, you have to go back to Jesus Christ. He's the only one who, lived it to the truest extent, of being a totally surrendered life to God.
I think that the quote that you quoted a little while ago, the Richard Rohr quote, I think good programs do that well on the context of what you're describing. Like they exemplify living. Right. Which changes the way people think. It's what, the AA is trying to get at with do 90 and 90. Right? Or the quote, fake it till you make it, right? Like it's, if you're present here long enough and this is exemplified to you and you see the benefit in my life of following Jesus, then maybe that's the best sales pitch to follow Jesus yourself.
Yeah. I think to some degree that's true, and I think that, like you said, it is the actual, the actual process. That's why, I'll say this the same way I've always said it. True recovering, people who get into recovery make the best recovery counselors. Because if they're truly there. Now, I've seen people who have been through recovery programs. They also make, if they're not there, they make the worst counselors. So it's really a process of transformation that's going on, and you can't always read that. You can to a degree, but you always have people who are saying the right things, but they're really not there. And I had one counselor many, many years ago that, he kept telling the guys, if you just learn more scripture and if you do more of this, you could be like me. And he had terrible anger issues, and he had, just a rotten personality at times. And finally, I just had to tell him one day, I'll call him Sam. That wasn't his name, but I said, Sam, I don't want these guys to be like you. I really don't. I said, you've got a lot of issues in your life. He said, what do you mean? I said, your anger issues, your other issues, you got to work on those things. He said, well, I resign. I said, well, I don't want you to resign. I want you to work on those things. But he left angry. But the truth was, if you think you got it, you don't.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the bottom line. If it's not something you get. It's something that you constantly press towards in the journey to really reach the point, that you're ready for the next step. That's I'm really, at this point at 70, be 75 here in about 2 months. At 75, I'm in the step of learning how to be passive. It's very hard to be passive. Jesus' greatest work was done in that last week of passivity. He accomplished more in that 1 week than he did in the whole 3 years of all the work that he did. And sometimes we get so caught up in doing the work that we forget that God works in our passiveness. And God works a lot in us in our passiveness. We don't always need to be trying to accomplish something for God. We need to sometimes be, God, I need you to accomplish something in me. That's a hard struggle. I've been a workaholic. Addictions, by the way, are myriad.
Sure.
Most alcoholics are addicted to many things, not just alcoholism. And like you said, but a starting point is good. But to learn to be still. I have had, for several years, I've had my times to be still, 30 minutes in the morning and times like that.
And the Lord just took your knee a couple of months ago, made you be still for a whole season.
Yeah, well, it's pretty stiff now still, but to be still intentionally for days, and to just spend time with God and other people, not to ignore other people, but at the same time not to be, telling people what they need to do, not to be giving advice, giving correction, talking. I talk to a lot of guys. I have a lot of guys who still call me on a fairly regular basis to talk about recovery and life and what's going on in their life. And, and they always say, what do you think I should do about this? What do you think I should do about that? And, I always say, well, what do you think you should do? And
you drove me crazy the few times that I asked you for advice on something, and you would not give it to me.
Yeah.
You made me think about it. So you're jumping all over this idea about control again.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people get to the place of recovery, and if they go to a program or whatever method they use to find recovery, they're actually after the opposite of what the step says, right? So the step talks about powerlessness and unmanageability. So I'm going to read it the way I think people actually pursue it. They want to admit that they are powerful over their human condition and their life has become manageable. Right? Like they want recovery to teach them how to beat the addiction. When the step is after the opposite of that, right? The step is after powerlessness. So what does that mean? What is powerlessness?
Powerlessness, well, it means realizing, that I am not going, under my own power, I'm not going to get to the destination. I absolutely have to come to the place that I'm willing to allow God to be the center of my life, and to allow Him to be in control of my life. I think that, there's two phases of life. There's the building phase of life that we talk about, where the primary goals is to grow up, get an education, get a good job, get married, get a house, build a family, raise kids, do all of those things. But the second half of life is more about gaining wisdom and learning more about where God's taking me and what I can do to influence that. And I think it's very hard. Someone once said that and I'll just tell you someone once told me there are 10 very important lessons you have to learn in life, but you can't learn any of them until you're over 50.
I'm getting close.
and that's because the ego, the drive to accomplish and to be a part of, and pulls constantly on that flexing between powerlessness and power is back and forth. I remember in my 30s and 40s, it's a constant battle. Yeah, I'm powerless, but I got to do this, and I got to make this happen. And if I don't accomplish this, they'll fire me if I don't get that done, and you get into all of that back and forth to where it's really, I don't think it's possible to become completely powerless, but I think that you have to realize that, you're powerless over the dysfunctions in your life. And if you don't get honest with God and other human beings, which is going to be on down the road in one of your other podcasts, if you can't get to the place that you have people you can go sit down with and say, hey, I've lost it. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm in this mess. Because the reality is, it's a never-ending battle between powerlessness and power. It's the human predicament. It's the reality that, go back to Genesis 3, and you've heard this statement from me many times again. The one thing that every human being on planet Earth wants to do is be in control of their life. And the one thing God has said we absolutely cannot do is be in control of our own life. Now, that is a predicament, It
is a predicament.
And the struggle is that's why recovery is a journey. You can't get there. You can't get there. You can only be on the journey of getting there. Because the only time I'll get there is when I see Jesus face to face, and whatever transformation will come at that point, and I'm not even sure, I've never been to heaven. I plan on being there. That's my greatest desire, is to be where He is. But I'm not even sure that we won't continue learning when we get there. I'm not even sure that at that point we'll just sort of, everybody would like to think that, and I call this the fairy godmother God, it's just twang. You're all there now. Everything's there. But what if heaven is about continuing a journey even further? What if there's even more to learn and know than we can even imagine at this point in our journeys? Because we're still trying to figure out just how to do life, just how to manage life and live in a world, we live in an angry, bitter world today. I mean, this world is, struggling so desperately, and talk about the power. I mean, that's, everybody, if you're not for them, then they want to know what you're for, so they can be against you better. And it's all about this power struggle of who's going to be in charge. And it's like a bunch of ants on an anthill trying to decide which one of them's going to control the universe. We're not going to solve world problems with the kind of mentality that's so prevalent in our world today. We're only going to get to that place when we can come to the realization that we have to learn how to love and care for one another. And Addiction and Grace by Gerald May is one of the most powerful books. And he's written another book. I can't think of the title of it now, but it's I'll find it here in a minute for you. But he talks about the reality that we really, addiction really is a byproduct of love. What happens is we fall in love with something because it's so good for us, and then it becomes bad for us, because we make it all about us.
Yeah.
And so what happens is addiction becomes that process where, so many women or men, it could go either way, but I see it, I've dealt with so many more women who are addicted to addicted men. They just keep going to try to rescue addicted men, and that it's codependence is what it is. Happiness is a Choice is a book everybody ought to read, because they talk so much about the reality that most of us have more codependence than we realize going on, because it's that process of trying to change people into what we think they need to be, or get people where they need to be, instead of letting people figure out where they need to be, and helping them, like I did you. Well, what do you want to do, Ryan? I mean, it's and like I have done with so many, it doesn't matter what I want you to do, that's not important, because you can't do what I want you to do. You can only do what you and God decide is the right thing for you to do, and when you do that, you'll be fulfilled, and fulfillment comes, I would have to say, my greatest fulfillment came in my last 5 years at Pathway House, because that was a time that I was totally out of my comfort zone. I had always made the statement that I would never be an executive director, because I had no desire to be an executive director, because my desire was to help people change their lives. And you don't do that very much with a board. It's very hard to help a board change their lives. And you don't do that with fundraisers, because you can speak into their lives in powerful ways. You can be positive in their lives, but you have to be very careful about how you do those things. But I was in an element that I was very uncomfortable in, and I had never raised any money in my life to speak of, other than just participating in.
At least not directly.
Not directly, right. And so, I went into this with just simply the God said, this is what I want you to do, and you can do it, And so I just went in with, I'm here, I'll show up. And I showed up, and God did it.
Which is powerlessness, right?
Right.
It's
right.
definitional powerlessness.
It is. And that was the essence of that ministry, was that God showed up in a powerful way and allowed me to be a part of something He was doing that, sorry about that, probably did more for me than it did for Greenwood, in the true sense of the word, because the reality was, the transformation in my life was again just another tremendous step forward in that journey of understanding how powerful powerlessness is.
Because the Lord took you out of your comfort zone where you could not rely on your own strength or your own wisdom or your own experience, and put you in a position where you had to rely on him.
Right.
Which maybe is the blessing of addiction.
Yeah.
Right? Like when you get to that moment of understanding that the control you have is an illusion,
right.
Then you can enter into that process.
Yeah.
So I had a question down here, but I feel like we've already answered it, right? So can somebody truly enter into the process of recovery while they still maintain the illusion of control of their own life? And the short answer is no. If they do, they're only going to be engaging in, a piece of the puzzle, which may be the start of the process for them, but they're never going to be into that beautiful equation of sanctification, right? They're just going to be acknowledging one area of brokenness and maintaining control of the rest.
I just had a thought that I would share that I think that one of the primary necessities of really getting into recovery is being able to live with the question. We're all about answers, and one of the struggles that I had early on and for a long time was learning to live with the question rather than have the answer. Am I where I need to be? That's a good question. I don't have the answer. And I think that, like you said, if you say you're in recovery, but you're in denial, and you're really about accomplishing a goal through your own power, you're not in recovery. But if you say you're in recovery, but you struggle with trying to take back the power, then you're in recovery.
Yeah.
Because then you can wrestle, with you can wrestle with God like Jacob did. You have to, we don't have a one night wrestling match with God. It's an ongoing struggle in the journey to constantly go back and say, I won't mention any towns, places, or locations, but there was one decision that I made in my journey that I made because I was very angry and upset about some things that had happened, and somebody had said something to me that really upset me. They said, well, you would never really be able to go anywhere else because you don't have this, that, and the other, and so I made the decision to go somewhere else to transfer from one ministry to another. And when I got there, everything seemed right, everything looked good, everything felt right, and I was going right where I decided I was going. And when I got there, 2 months after I got there, everything started falling apart. And I tell the story this way. I said, God, I don't understand what's going on. What's happening? And God said, I don't know. You said you were in control. You took control. And when you take control, then God lets you.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, God lets you take control. And when you take control, you wind up with the biggest mess you're trying to control that you could ever possibly imagine. And there's no way to control it. And I wound up having to resign, and I wound up, as a result, unemployed for 2 years, and during that 2 years, it was all about reconnecting with what am I about and why am I doing this? Now I wasn't unemployed in the truest sense of the word. I worked as a quality control manager in a car dealership, and I worked as a plumber's helper, and I was working to provide income.
Sure.
But I wasn't doing what God had called me to do, and I wasn't where I needed to be, and God wouldn't let me go there until I got to the place that I really understood. It was sort of a sabbatical of sorts, you might say.
It was the desert.
Yeah, it was
where
the
you
desert.
did a little plumbing.
Yeah, where I did a little plumbing, but it was that journey of getting back, like you said, into that realization that it's only, as we're on this spiritual process that we can get there,
So there's somebody who's going to listen to this. It's kind of the closing question. Somebody who's going to listen to this that, man, is right on the precipice, right? Like that knows that whatever they're doing isn't working, that understands that they have a problem, but probably doesn't know where to start or how to address it. What do you tell somebody like that? How do you help them to see the depth of their own depravity and to start facing their life?
Well, I think it starts with again, I just encourage them to get out of their head, and quit trying to think about what the answer is, and start doing positive things that move them in a direction to be able to accept the fact that they're going to have help to deal with this problem. And that help will probably come in the form of other human beings who are going to help them initially. But the ultimate answer is in that relationship with God. Mm-hmm. But you have to, the longest journey starts with the first step, and you have to take the steps. You can't, so many people plan in their head for years and years and years what they're going to do and how they're going to deal with it, and they never do anything, and I've been guilty of doing some of that myself in parts of my journey. But the struggle is to just say, I'm going to do the next right thing. I'm going to take the next right step. I'm going to contact somebody that I can trust, and hopefully that's Miracle Hill. Mm-hmm. I'm going to get in touch with somebody that can help me start moving in the direction I need to go so that my life can become what I want it to be, and not me trying to convince everybody that it is what I want it to be. That's the biggest struggle, I think, in the world today. Everybody's trying to convince everybody that they're happy, and the reality is we're mostly not. We're mostly not happy because we're mostly too tied up in trying to accomplish goals that we've set that really, when we accomplish them, they're empty. It goes back to Jeremiah. We become bubble-headed people. We're the house of the Lord, the house of the Lord. We're good because we're here, and we're here because we're good. And we get into that thinking that we've accomplished all these things. I see so many people who feel like they've accomplished so many things in their life, and yet at the end of the day, 2 homes, a boat, kids in college, those are great things, but they're not really accomplishments in the true sense of the word. They're simply things that we did to sort of keep things going in the way they needed to go. And so many people are unfulfilled on the inside. Where am I at in all of this process? Who am I really? How well do I know myself? I can only know myself as I learn to spend time with myself. Yeah.
And we're as sick as our secrets, right?
Definitely.
And so whether it's Miracle Hill or Ryan, the human being,
right,
or a local church, man,
right,
there is somebody out there that is chasing Jesus and wants to engage with somebody on their story, right? Like,
right,
reach out to somebody, whomever it is, and they will, they'll walk with you as you try to figure out how busted up you are, right?
Yeah.
If you're anybody like me, I'm real busted up. Right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, there's several pieces missing. I've got one artificial knee now, but there's several other pieces. That the puzzle is slowly coming together. Mm-hmm. But the journey's a long one, and There's another book that I would mention that some folks might like to read. It's called An Invitation to a Journey by Robert Mulholland, Dr. Bob Mulholland. He was a Methodist minister, but he was a great guy. I met him and knew him personally just a little bit before he died, but he was a brilliant man who talks about the journey of growing in relationship with God, and that's really what recovery is all about.
Yeah, amen. That's a great note to end on. Ken, it has been amazing. This has been a great conversation. Would you honor us and close by praying for those people that are out there,
Sure.
whether they're struggling with chemical addiction or not, that are maybe starting the journey of meeting and following Jesus?
Yeah, amen. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, Lord, I thank you today for the time that I've had and for the opportunity to talk with Ryan and the folks who listen to this podcast. And Lord, I know that there will be many, most all of us who listen to this will be touched by the reality that there are areas in my life that need your touch, that need your grace. And Lord, I just pray that you would just open their hearts and just allow them to sense the glorious presence of God in their life for a moment, that they might know that through Jesus Christ all things are possible if we believe. And Father, I just pray that they would learn to trust you and to believe that you will direct them into the path that will lead them into the paths of other people who love you, who can help them and guide them and minister to them in this journey of life. Lord, there are so many needs in our world today, and Lord, I know that your heart goes out to all who are struggling. And so, Lord, I just pray today that they would have a sense of your presence, a sense of your reality, and a sense of reassurance that you are for them, not against them. And that, Father, you hold nothing against them. All you desire is their transformation, their willingness to become who you created them to be, men and women who are blessed, who know the joy of salvation, who know the reality of life transformation, and who experience the peace that comes from only you and passes all understanding. And so, Father, I pray today that in a very special way, lives will be changed through the power of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Ken. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.